Some Assembly Required is about matters of the heart and the head. Winnie the Pooh is one of fiction's best loved characters. The overall theme of Winnie the Pooh is the importance of forming solid, lasting friendships. And with good friends, you will always have someone there to lean on, someone who will go on adventures and expeditions with you, and even someone who might invite you over for tea and a mouthful of something, and someone to tackle adversity with. How can we then be more like Winnie the Pooh, I wondered, and establish really strong relationships? And I figured we could ask Shelley Lewin. Thank you for being here, Shelley.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Thank you, Sean.
Only a
I'm
pleasure.
looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Yes, I suppose there's not necessarily a common association for us to try and be much like Winnie the Pooh, but would you agree with me that so much of his story has to do with really strong relationships that he can depend on every other character in the Hundred Acre
Absolutely.
Woods?
100%. Absolutely. And I think that that is an integral part of being human is we are social beings and we are psycho, biological, energetic and social beings. And that social aspect is a huge part of our resilience and well-being.
Now, Shelley, you're a certified SACAP counselor, an International Coach Federation member, and accredited professional certified coach, a Psych K master facilitator, Neurozone facilitator, an Enneagram certified coach, and a neuro-linguistic programming practitioner. But prior to racking up all of these accreditations, you worked as an international model in the fashion and beauty industry for a good couple of years. How did you go from that to this?
I really enjoyed my work when I was young, and that was a lifetime ago. And it was a really wonderful lifestyle, and to travel and explore. I lived and probably 20 countries, working and traveling, 3-month contracts at a time. And then what happened was I really started to realize at some point when directors would say to me, I would make a suggestion, and the director would say to me, "We're not paying you for your opinion. We're paying you to smile. Please just be aware of that." And I started to realize, oh my goodness me, my thoughts and what I have to say are really irrelevant. And in this industry, if I stay in this industry, well, that's kind of how it's going to be if I continue in this. And I thought, you know what, I actually wanted more. So my soul felt like, yes, it's lucrative, but it's not meaningful enough for me. So although it ticked the boxes in some aspects, in other aspects it was completely neglecting. And so I embarked on many different things, actually, studying many different things, trying to figure out what it was that I was going to grow, what do I want to be when I grow up? And so I tried many different things and thought one day I'm going to have to call it a day and move to something. And I stumbled across Lifeline, which is counseling. It's a telephone number that you call, and where if you're in trouble and there's someone to pick up the phone. And I just attended their free training that they did. And I completely fell in love with the counseling and the training. And that was for me when I realized this is the work that I want to do next. And then I embarked on my professional studies after that.
That's amazing. Following curiosity and ultimately ending up with discovering what your passion would be,
Exactly.
Shelley. And in all the years that you've been doing this and prior, can you think of a relationship for you that felt the easiest? I think if we think back to, our younger years, sometimes we think about those close friendships that we had that we would just laugh for hours and you wouldn't necessarily know why you were laughing, but it just felt so comfortable to be in somebody's presence. Was there a really good relationship for you moving from one country to the next and going from one job to the next? Can you think of a really easy relationship in your past?
Well, if we go right back to my childhood, I actually traveled quite a lot as a child as well. So, we were originally from Zambia, then we moved to Zimbabwe, and we immigrated from there. My family then moved to the US, then we went to the UK. So So I never really had the opportunity to form friendships. And the one solid, consistent relationship I had was with my mom. And she has always been like my best friend. So I have two sisters, but they were much older than me and weren't necessarily around or wanted to hang out with me. So there was too much of an age gap for me to build a really sort of solid friendship. So yes, they were there and their presence, they were always looking out for me, but they weren't like my buddy. And I think because I was very shy and I didn't form bonds easily because of that shyness, that whenever we moved country, I just had a consistent phone call with my mom. She was my best friend, actually, and still
Mm.
is. So
No,
I was
that's
very
beautiful that
blessed
there,
in that way.
yeah, beautiful that there is at least that one relationship that you can rely on.
Exactly.
Shelley,
Absolutely.
would you agree that when it comes to internal work that we do on ourselves to feel worthy, do you feel that that's an ongoing process, or can we arrive at that feeling?
No, definitely not. Well, in to feel worthy. So yes, actually, I think there's a point at which you feel more comfortable in your skin. Okay, and I would say that ironically, when I was working as a professional model and I did a lot of body work, so I was doing a lot of sportswear, underwear, lingerie. So I was the body model. And so I was a lot of the time semi naked or naked. And I was a nudist for a while. And the irony is that in all of that, I was probably least uncomfortable in my skin. And only when I moved into doing this work did I really start to, when I was doing all the studying and the self reflection, and did I realize that it all actually came from a lack of self worth. And eventually, the more comfortable I became with myself and self acceptance, the self acceptance leads to a self worthiness where you value yourself and who you are and what you're willing to put up with and not willing to put up with, and what you say yes to and what you say no to. And I think that the more worth you have, the kinder you are to yourself.
Hmm.
And so that is an ongoing process
Hmm.
because
I like the way
life
you
will give
phrase
you
that.
different circumstances, so different circumstances you will need to determine what does kindness to myself look like in this situation. And sometimes you have to choose not, sometimes when you're in a relationship, you choose what's most kind for your partner or most kind for your child. And sometimes you do take the back seat. So it's not about being self-absorbed and it's all about me and as long as I'm doing fine. It isn't that, but you can't be doing anything that's going to be detrimental to you, that's not sustainable. So it's fine
Right.
for you to put yourself second or third or fourth, as long as you're not always second, third, or fourth. There have to be
Okay.
times when you are the priority and you need to know when your tank is empty. So it's
Hmm.
about having a daily check in. How is my tank? How am I feeling? Am I completely exhausted? Okay, then my output is too high. Then I need to pull back a little bit. I need to focus on self care, self nourishment. What is my, what are my energy levels, that energy hygiene, knowing how much energy you have and how much you have to give out. Because if you aren't taking care of yourself, and I think that the self acceptance, self worthiness, self valuation piece is around giving yourself permission to check in to your tank and then
Wow.
saying, right, that's what I need.
I so much of that resonates, and it reminds me of a time I've spoken about it on the podcast before, where I've gone through burnout and not realized that I need to give myself the attention because I'm quite happy
Yes.
to make sure that others are comfortable and that they're taken care of more so than myself. And before we get further into the importance of having a healthy relationship with ourselves, how how does the way that we build and maybe evaluate the relationships we have with our colleagues and other professionals differ, if at all, to the relationships that we have with our friends or our families or our intimate relationships for that matter?
Okay, so the way that I see relationships and I work in the corporate space as well as a leadership coach. So what happens is that I discovered that actually relationships have this this dynamic, there are these dynamics at play. So it's around power and who has it. So there are relationships above, or vertical relationships. So professionally, that would be your leader or your customer. In your home life, that would be your parents and, all your elders. Relationships to the side are horizontal relationships. Professionally would be your co-workers and your peers. And in your personal life is your partner. And then
Mm.
you have relationships below where you have the power. And that is,
Mm.
in your professional life, is your direct reports, anyone reporting to you. And in your personal life, it's your children or your dependents, so people that are relying on you. So you have relationships above, to the side, and below. And in each of those, someone has the power. So that usually the relationships above, those people have the power, and depending on how they use that power, they are either empowering you or disempowering you. Okay. And then relationships to the side, you're either empowering each other or not, the same. And if you are the parent or the leader who has direct reports or children, then you have the power. And what tends to happen is when people have the power, they expect obedience and compliance. And unfortunately, that's not going to build a healthy relationship. So people might do it because they respect you until they don't. And essentially, what will happen is that you want, instead of compliance and obedience, you want people to collaborate with you and to cooperate with you. And the way that you do that is by empowering them, supporting them, motivating them, guiding them, and inspiring them. And they will want to follow you then. So a leader is someone who has followers. And if you don't have followers, then you're not a leader. And people will want to follow you if you are supporting, encouraging, cooperating, and you want what's best for them. So this plays out in any personal context or professional context. It's about understanding what is the dynamic that's at play. And sometimes your relationships to the side in a partnership, a traditional relationship. So when I say traditional, old school relationships used to be that in many cases, the wife is seen as a dependent, where the husband takes care of the wife. She's almost like another dependent, like another child. And so it can very easily slip into that power dynamic where the man is the boss of the home and he determines or dictates how things are going to be, instead of seeing it as in a relationship of equality. So if it's a relationship to the side, it has to be treated as a relationship where we are equal opposites. And as an equal and opposite, I treat you with care, and your opinion matters, and it's mutual regard. Not I'm the boss and I decide and you do what I say because I'm wearing the pants and I pay here.
I hear you. I hear you. So then my follow-up question to that was going to be, so then what is the foundation of a good relationship? And if I understand what you're saying, it comes down to that mutual respect then, and building the capacity to encourage someone else to be the best that they can possibly be.
100%. So I would say that how it's a good relationship is a healthy relationship, and it's a quality relationship where both people can thrive. That to me
Okay.
is how I would determine. So a relationship should be a springboard or a catalyst for you to become the best version of yourself. And if it isn't allowing that, if it isn't encouraging that or supporting that, it's not a healthy relationship.
Right, right. Okay, so then if we move then to being able to establish said healthy relationship, we may have to talk a bit about shifting mindsets and then changing perspectives on things. As you say, traditional relationships or relationships of years gone by, a man leading the house for argument's sake. But now for us to get to building a solid foundation for any relationship, we may then need to create new habits and potentially embed some different patterns for people listening to this to understand how that behavior needs to be changed. How do you, Shelley, then as a counselor start to, shall we say, unravel those perspectives and maybe make people more self-aware in order for them to change their behaviors?
So when I work with couples, in the first session, what I do is I'm a relationship coach. So I just want to make the distinction between a relationship therapist and a relationship coach. Okay. So a relationship therapist is predominantly looking at pathology, what's wrong, and we look to the
Mm.
past. And how dark is the hole, how deep is the hole, who put the hole there, who's responsible, and you spend a lot of time exploring the problem in the past. A relationship coach is looking at things from the present and the future perspective. So you're looking at the solution in the future. What is this preferred future, this desired reality that you'd like to have as a couple? So in this desired reality where we are working as a team and we're a powerful partnership, what does that look like? And if this is where we are now, what is the change that needs to happen to get us moving forward in that direction? Okay.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so what happens is I will, when I see a couple, the first session, I ask them to describe what that preferred future looks like. What does that miracle relationship or miraculous, powerful partnership, the ultimate dream team, what does that look like? And each person gets to describe it, okay? And I will ask them if that is what your relationship, so you've each had a description, and I'd say, so can you rate that um, uh, in terms of where you are now? So if that's 10 out of 10, that description,
Mm.
where would you say the relationship moves between at the moment? So what's the envelope of variation? And they will say, some will say, so let's say that one partner says it's between a 3 and a 6, and the other one says it's between a 4 and a 7. So already we have an idea of what we're working with here and how far away we are from that ideal scenario. Then I will say to the person, then each person, so what is it that gets you closer to 0? So what is the habits, the behaviors that your partner is demonstrating that pull you closer to 0? Because we want to stop doing those things. And what are the behaviors that pull you or will draw you closer to 10? So each person takes responsibility to stop doing the things that take you to 0 and to
Hmm.
start doing the things that take you closer to 10. And so
Okay.
with each person is doing two things, stopping something and starting something. And so essentially that already, then the next time that we meet, we reevaluate what is it that that has helped, what's working, what progress have you noticed? And so we very slowly, it's an iterative process where each couple determine what they need. So I can't give you a simple answer here in terms of, because every couple is different. Having said
Mhm.
that, obviously I've written a book now, Uncomplicated Love, which is a step-by-step guide for building a thriving relationship. And so what I did is that I did identify that after having doing this for many, many years, or like almost 17, 18 years now, that there are definitely themes and patterns that have come out when I'm working with couples, and there seems to be some very specific things. So, for example, I talk about relationships as being an art, a science, and a practice. So
Right.
the art is compatibility. So we
Hmm.
are more or less aligned and more or less compatible with someone, depending on who we are and what we need to thrive. Okay, so there's the art of compatibility. Then there's the science. The science is the science of intimacy and love, which is your attachment styles. And so each of us has an attachment style, either a secure attachment style or an insecure attachment style, and that is going to impact how we show up in a relationship. And you will either show up as someone who's needy and wants and needs reassurance consistently, or someone who is avoidant, which is like they dip their toe into intimacy. So they need space, they need independence and freedom. And then you have a secure attachment, which is someone who feels safe and comfortable in relationships. So I'm always watching and listening for, is this a compatibility thing? Is this a attachment style thing? And then the last thing is the practices, and that is around partnership. So we either have the partnering ability and the skills to show up as a quality partner, or we don't. Like in sport, you would have an A team, B team, C, D team. Are you an A team player or a D team player? So some
Sure.
people are excellent at communication. So they would be, maybe an A team player in terms of your ability to communicate, but then they're not very good at navigating conflict, for
Mm.
example. So these are all skills that are required. So as I go through this process with couples, I'm trying to basically diagnose, is the root of their challenge a compatibility issue, an attachment style issue, or a partnership issue? And I really believe that almost all relationships would benefit from doing personal development, from taking ownership for yourself and your own relationship with yourself, self-acceptance. If you know that the problem is we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
And so you'll go into a relationship not necessarily realizing where your challenges lie. And so that's one of the reasons why I've written the book, is because I really believe that individual therapy or individual personal coaching could be the
Hmm.
best couple therapy you will ever get. And because many challenges that show up in a relationship are not actually relationship problems between us, it's more that one person has a particular challenge, or one person struggling with communication, or one person struggling with anger issues. So it shows up between us, but it isn't actually a relationship problem. It's an individual's issue, which is why I say people are complicated and relationships are not. So that was a
Well,
very long answer, Sean. I'm sorry. I know you get me
no,
started on something. You can hear I'm very
I
excited about this.
I love hearing your passion come through, and you tell the story so well. And I followed beautifully through everything you've
Oh,
said
good.
there. I should probably tell everybody that I've done an attachment style quiz, and I'm looking forward to finding out what my attachment style is. We'll get there. You've just
Okay.
said though that people are complicated, but you've titled the book "Uncomplicated Love."
Yes.
Why that distinction?
So, because love doesn't need to be complicated, one of the biggest cliches in relationships is it's complicated. We
Hmm.
just hear about that all the time. It's complicated. And we're like, oh, yeah, sure, it is. It's complicated. We know that. We get that. But to me, that's a narrative that you've been telling yourself for a very long time that is un it's not true. It's unhealthy. It's a myth that needs to be broken. And the truth is that people are complicated. Relationships are not. Relationships are actually very simple. That's what I'm saying. It's an art, a science, and a practice. And when you get the art, the science, and the practice, and you understand that, then your relationship can flow. So I've spent 20 years trying to figure this out. And that was born from my own wounds, because I was completely terrible at relationship. And
You were?
I was terrible. Yes. So that's really probably where this comes from, is that, and it's in the book. So the book is weaved with my personal experiences and my professional experiences. So I I was in many complicated relationships filled with drama, very sort of unsatisfying and unfulfilling relationships. And at some point, I realized maybe the problem is me. And that was when my fiance left me. I sort of had
Oh
that
no.
realization, maybe I am the common denominator here. And so I embarked on this journey with a coach and doing a huge amount of self reflection. And that was where this career of mine was born. And that was one of the reasons that I got into counseling as well, is because I was trying to understand myself a little bit better, to heal myself. And so as I went into this work, I became my own guinea pig and decided, if I can figure this out for myself. And the funny thing was, I remember I did a personality profile assessment at the time. and it said in there that it actually said in the assessment that my results were that I would be completely clueless and useless in relationships. So, and the reason they said it, because I'm an analyst, and so it said these types of people obviously often struggle in relationships because they just don't get them.
Okay.
It doesn't fit into their analytical mind. Relationships don't make sense. And that's what it said in
Sure.
the thing. I was like, you're right, they don't make sense. So I then decided I was going to spend the next 20 years trying to make sense of them. And that's what I believe that I've done. I've made sense, common sense of relationships. And that's why I say people are complicated. Relationships are actually not.
You've obviously come to good conclusions because you've already mentioned that you've been married for many, many years. So I can only assume that you took your learnings and you turned that situation around.
Yes, exactly. So that's why I say that I'm my own social proof that I have been married now. Well, we've been together for well over 20 years and married for 18. And we have a very solid foundation and a solid friendship and a really great marriage. And so I, not only was I applying the theories to myself, but also to my husband. He also
Mm.
wasn't potentially aware that I was using him as to experiment on, like let me, I would like read or learn something and then I would apply it to myself and to him and see, oh, that worked. Wow, that went better than I thought. And then I would share that with my clients. And so there's definitely, I would say, much more clarity for myself and confidence because I've not only applied it to myself, but to my clients over the years who have
Mm.
managed to develop healthy and respectful and fulfilling relationships.
Relationships. Yeah. I think a lot of what you've already said, you'll agree with my sentiments that I often feel life is what you make of it. Your external life is a reflection of your internal narratives. And you mentioned narratives a little
100%.
earlier. What are some of the more common stories then that you find we are telling ourselves that we build our lives around that might not necessarily be true true to us, these narratives that we developed internally that we're now externalizing, and we actually need to break those narratives down? What are some of those more common narratives that you deal with?
So, the thing is, it may not necessarily be something that you're conscious of, and it's
Mm.
almost always a belief is mostly unconscious, but you would have an unconscious belief. I'm not worthy. I'm not deserving. I don't belong. Or I can only rely on me. People are unreliable. People are not, I don't feel safe in relationships or, those sort of narratives are things that you may not necessarily be aware of. So I'm going to just open and share some of in the book that I've got, I sort of identified some common myths. So maybe I can just draw on some of those. So, for example, um, I say some of the misconceptions or outdated narratives. So I've got here, we can't survive without each other. And people think that's romantic, when actually we can't survive without each other is codependence and enmeshment. That's
Mm.
not healthy. The perfect person will complete me and fill any void or emptiness I feel. One half plus one half equals one. And
Sure.
the realistic narrative for that is there's no perfect person, only a better or worse match. I am whole and complete as I am. One plus one equals three. Another one, compatibility equals shared interests and hobbies. No, compatibility equals absolute freedom to be yourself. Go where you are celebrated, not where you are tolerated. So, in the book, I'm just sharing bits with you that, what about this one? My partner is responsible for making me happy.
Sure. Yeah.
The realistic narrative. I'm responsible for creating a life that is meaningful and fulfilling to me. Outdated. Once we are married and the deal is sealed, my work is done. Contemporary narrative. Deep connections between people are nurtured when the relationship is consistently prioritized, protected, and revered. And then I'll just share one last one. After I've found the right one, we'll live happily ever after. So I'm looking for the right partner.
Hmm.
And then realistic is a quality relationship is the reward I get for being a quality, dependable partner. So it's around, you can hear, and there's quite a few more. Um, I'm happy to share more if you like, but there's there's so many. So you wouldn't necessarily see underneath that is these stories of about how we don't take responsibility for
Sure.
ourself, our well-being, our that I've got my back. We put too much emphasis on that other people will come and look after me and take care of me, and you know and it's you. You come into this world and it's you, and when you go out it's you, and it's
Sure.
you need to build a relationship with.
And that brings me to two thoughts now. One with regards to attachment styles that may be developed around core beliefs. But the first thought was immediately that maybe the most important relationship we could ever have, and the relationship that should be the easiest, is the relationship with ourselves. And we spend so
100%.
little
Yeah.
time investing in that relationship
Absolutely.
because, as
Yes.
you've just highlighted, we're expecting for other people to complete us, for other people to make us happy, for other situations to make our lives that much easier, when in actual fact, we need to do the deep work consistently
Absolutely.
in each different scenario, relearn how to interact and engage with the cards that are being dealt. Um, Shelley, then on my first point that I was trying to well, that I brought up now with regards to the narratives and the core beliefs,
Mm,
if attachment styles are such a big part of our relationships, how we engage, right? You referred to that as the science part
yes.
of our relationships, and part of the book, Uncomplicated Love. How, yeah, what impact does that core belief have on developing an attachment style? Is there anything to say that they're connected in any way?
So what happens is when you're a child, your early the first relationship that you will develop as a child is with your caregivers. And so either that experience will be one where you feel safe and you will associate close connections and bonding as something that makes you feel safe, okay? Or you will experience it as something that is risky and that you
Okay.
feel unsafe in it. So if your parents weren't available for you emotionally, if they sometimes were and sometimes weren't, and they were unpredictable, and you just sort of never really knew where you stood, so you would have an unconscious programming
Mm-hmm.
associated with bonding and connection. If you have a healthy association to it, you would recognize I feel safe in a relationship where there's intimacy, and I feel and I can relax and be at peace and ease when I am in relationship with someone, because
Mm-hmm.
intimacy is not scary, it's not threatening in any way, there's no risk to me. And so that's secure attachment. But if you didn't have that experience, as a as you grow up and become an adult, it will kind of fork into one or two responses. The one is that you're permanently needing to feel safe,
Mm-hmm.
which is this anxious attachment. So anxious attachment is I need my partner to keep telling me that I'm lovable and that I'm, that they're not going anywhere, they're not going to abandon me, that they keep. So there's a clinginess, a neediness, which is codependence, enmeshment, entanglement. It's like I need to merge with you to feel safe. Or you have the opposite response, which is that you distance yourself and you want more freedom and more independence. I can rely on me. I only rely on myself. Other people are unreliable. And so what that means is that you will be permanently wanting, because you're wired for connection, so you'll want the intimacy, but you will then, when you feel too close to someone, there'll be an unconscious threat that this is risky, so then you'll push back. So
Okay.
it creates this um, almost like the person who's in relationship with an avoidant, when they're all in and then they suddenly disappear, then they're all in and then they disappear. And so that is an avoidant. So the one prioritizes freedom and independence. If it's insecure, that's avoidant, or safety and closeness. And those are the two responses that you would have. And so, Sean, I can tell you that you landed square in the middle with the score, which was secure.
Oh, really?
Yes, so you do not have a insecure attachment style that you need to be worried about.
Wonderful. I was listening
Yes,
to how you were describing those things, and I was like, okay, I can see some of my behaviors potentially in what you're describing. And the first thing that came to mind was a friend of mine that used to describe me as an onion because he felt like he had to really peel off all of the layers to get to the deep core of what I enjoyed and feel, capable of sharing and really let myself be myself.
yes.
So
Okay,
I
so
was,
it takes
I,
you a while to build the intimacy. So you
I think
you
so.
really need to trust completely before you surrender into that relationship where that vulnerability is a big piece here. So when it comes to attachment styles, the thing that each individual needs to do is have capacity for vulnerability. So
Okay.
you can hear that if you are someone who is avoidant, you have very little capacity for vulnerability. You don't want to feel vulnerable. You don't want to put yourself, it's too risky. So you have very little capacity. Whereas if you are anxious, you're willing to be vulnerable, you're willing to take the risk because you really need someone to tell you all the time how amazing you are or how lovable you are. So it's around capacity for intimacy, and that's vulnerability. And that's why vulnerability is, and there are many profound people, Brené Brown and loads of people
Mm.
that have written and spoken so much about vulnerability as a is not a weakness, it's a strength.
Yep. Yep. And Brené, in fact, I remember an interview she did a while back where she mentions much similar to what you were saying earlier about partnership and how some people feel that the other person is going to complete them, like, my half plus the other half makes a whole.
Yes,
And
yes,
she
versus
speaks very
one
much
plus
about.
one equals
Yes, and she
three.
speaks
Yeah.
very much about if you walk into the room and your capacity is only at 20%, then I'm stepping in and I go, cool, I've got 80. Don't worry, I'll carry us through this. And
Yes,
that's how we make the
yes,
100%. But if we're both only at 20 and we can't make up the 100, we need to sit down and decide how exactly are we going to get ourselves to be that 100% and to get through whatever the situation is. And I like that explanation very much. And as you quite rightly say, from a capacity building standpoint and understanding what you're capable of handling in any one situation does set you up for handling your relationship well. My question with regards to my attachment style, as you've just mentioned now,
mm,
being secure, if for example, and as an argument, for argument's sake, let's say my wife or my partner is the opposite of that, how would that show up in our relationship? If I'm very secure and if the opposite is an insecure attachment style, what would that
yes.
then show up as in our marriage, in our relationship? What would that look like?
So so what's quite common is that you will have an anxious and avoidant are actually often attracted to each other, and that's often defined by power struggles. So if there's a lot of power struggles in the relationship, then we know that we're definitely working with insecure attachment. That's one of the
Okay.
ways in which I recognize it. But if you are, so that might be less so in the case where one person has a secure attachment, and it's often just around the person who's insecure, depending on which insecure attachment style they have. So that, remember, the one is that they're trying to avoid intimacy, and the other one is needing it all the time, and
Hmm.
so it will show up in different ways. But I do think that it's quite interesting how So I have this visual vesica Pisces. I don't know if you're aware of that Venn diagram with two circles that overlap with a little space in between. And so I use that image, and in fact, it's an image that I use consistently throughout the book. So I'm just going to show it. This is the image I'm referring to.
Right. Me, us,
And
you.
so there's a circle which is me, a circle which is you, and then there's the space in the middle which is the us space. And so what happens is when the circles are overlapped in an equal balance, then there's this healthy us. So your identity is very much around your well-being and the relationship's well-being. But when you have circles that are completely merged, then the us completely becomes the identity of the individual. So I'm listening for how that person communicates. Do they see themselves as separate, or do they see the relationship as part of their identity? So someone who has a secure attachment style can see there's a me and there's an us, versus the us. If the us isn't going well, I can't have a good day. I can't go to work and just focus on work. Like my whole life becomes consumed when the us is bent out of shape. They're unable to separate themselves from the us. And then the other would be that that there's indifference. So if you have an avoidant, then the circles are sort of pulling apart from each other. And in that case, that person almost is indifferent, couldn't really care less if the relationship isn't going that well, because they're sort of disconnected from it, almost waiting for it to fall apart because, oh, well, that's what happens, I can only rely on me. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so it depends on what the combination is of the couple.
Okay. And then with attachment styles, they're indicating a person's capacity for intimacy, but then clearly based on that, it can affect your other relationships, as you say, if you're thinking that, you're only worthy because your relationship is stable, or conversely,
Yes.
that's
So
going to
what's
carry
very
over into your other
interesting,
relationships when you
it
go to
does.
work.
It does, but what's very interesting is that you can have different attachment styles in different and so you can
Okay.
be, yes, so it doesn't, your relationships in work, you can have a secure attachment and but in your home environment an insecure. So it's not a universal that applies to all relationships. And in fact, there is a website that you can go and take the test, and it will show you the different relationships where you fall. So it doesn't go through in all contexts. So I'm working specifically when I'm working with couples on how they show up in their intimate relationships.
Beautiful. That is fascinating. And relationships are so integral to everything that we do. I can only encourage more people to spend more time on figuring themselves out and then entering relationships from a healthy perspective. Because from what you're
Absolutely.
saying, Shelley, it just gets that much better if we consider ourselves first.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I would say, every person, like required reading, I think when you leave school, you should know your attachment style and what the impact of that is going to be. And your attachment style is not set in stone. It's not concrete. So I was avoidant. And that was my attachment style. That's why my fiance left me.
Mm.
So I was behaving badly. And every relationship that I was going into, I was the common denominator, and that would have continued unless I took ownership for that and took a look in the mirror and said, okay, what is going on here? What am I doing, and why am I behaving this way? And I identified, okay, so this is my attachment style that I'm dealing with. Now, how do I fix that? And it's around, you first have to have awareness. So awareness of what are we dealing with here? Okay. Once you have an awareness, then it becomes a choice. So, when you're not aware, when you don't know that you don't know, you can't choose something different because it just falls, it's not on your radar. So you don't even know that you're doing something wrong. But when you are aware, then you have choice about what you're going to do next time. And then you can, with choice, then you can practice. So you can choose, instead of running away or instead of following the person, like you don't leave me, you're not leaving, I'm locking the door, you're not going anywhere. Like you choose a different behavior and a different response in that moment, and you keep choosing a different one and you keep choosing a different one. And then with practice, you get to mastery. So my sort of pathway for any shift is first awareness, then choice, then practice, then mastery. And so the awareness piece, that is a big part of what this book is all about, actually, is that I do believe it should be required reading because, and that was what someone else said to me that read it recently, and that was the feedback they gave to me. And that's probably the best compliment that I've ever had. And this person, he's a coach, and he said, this should be required reading because there's so much that I didn't know that I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, exactly. Is it a surprise then why we have such complicated relationships?
Or so to say, complicated relationships when they could be
uncomplicated.
Precisely. So to say, complicated when they could actually be uncomplicated love. And as you quite rightly said, there's an art, there's a science, and then there's the practice. And I know, Shelley, you'll agree with Rumi, who said your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers with yourself that you have built against it.
Absolutely. Do you know that that's what's in the front of the book, Sean? Do you know that that's what the book is centered around?
I think you've mentioned it a few times to me, so I figured I should definitely include it in the interview. Yeah.
It's wonderful. Absolutely.
Shelley,
it's such a beautiful quote.
Shelley Lewin lives in Cape Town with her husband, Nate, her son, Pierce, and their Burmese cat, Bernie. If you're curious to know what your attachment style is, I have included the survey link in the show notes, as well as more information on Shelley's coaching practice and her book, Uncomplicated Love. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Some Assembly Required. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit the follow button inside the app that you're listening on right now. And go ahead, share it with your podcast listening friends. I personally think we can all use a reminder to work on our internal dialogue and the relationship that we've developed with ourselves. And this could be that reminder. You'll find links to the Some Assembly Required YouTube channel, my Instagram account, as well as my free newsletter, Sean Shifted Something, in the show notes. I'd really like to see you subscribe and follow along. My name is Sean Lewitz, and this is Some Assembly Required. See you soon.